My name is Margaret Lewis, and I never thought the boy I raised with my own two hands would one day look at me like a stranger. For most of my life, my world revolved around my son, Ethan. From the moment I first held him in that cold hospital room 28 years ago, I made him a promise that I would protect him from everything. I was a single mother, abandoned by a husband who chose freedom over family, so Ethan became my reason to keep breathing. Every night when I came home from my two jobs, exhausted and aching, I would peek into his room, watch him sleep, and tell myself, it's all worth it. And for a long time it was. Ethan was kind, gentle, and always said I was his hero. But heroes, I've learned, only stay heroes until someone else writes a new story about you. That story began to change the day he met her. Her name was Olivia, the woman who would take my son away from me without ever lifting a weapon. I still remember the first time Ethan brought her home. She was beautiful, polite, with a smile that could light up a dark room. I wanted to like her. I really did. But something about the way she looked at me, calm, composed, assessing, made my stomach twist. She wasn't shy. She was calculating. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that if Ethan loved her, I had to love her too. For months, things seemed fine on the surface. Ethan called me every day, came over for dinner on weekends, and Olivia even helped me in the kitchen a few times. But underneath those polite smiles, I felt something shifting, something I couldn't quite name. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Olivia looked me in the eye and said softly, "Margaret, you've done so much for Ethan, but don't you think it's time to let him live his own life now?" The words sounded innocent, but the tone, it was a gentle cut. I smiled, nodded, but inside something cracked. She wanted distance. She wanted my place. Over the next few months, Ethan's visits became fewer. The calls grew shorter. And then one day, they stopped altogether. My phone sat silent for weeks. I told myself he was busy, newly married, building a life, but the silence hurt. One rainy afternoon, I decided to surprise him. I baked his favorite pie, apple cinnamon, and drove across town to his house. When I rang the bell, Olivia opened the door. Her smile was sharp. "Oh, Margaret, you should have called." I laughed awkwardly. "I just wanted to see my son." She hesitated before stepping aside. The house felt cold, too perfect, like it didn't belong to Ethan at all. When he came downstairs, his expression wasn't joy, it was guilt. "Mom, you can't just show up like this," he said. I froze. I'd heard those words before, from his father years ago, when I had gone to his office begging him to come home. History, it seemed, had found a cruel way to repeat itself. I tried to explain, tried to tell Ethan I missed him, but Olivia stood behind him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. "We're really busy today, Margaret," she said. "Maybe another time." Another time. Another time that never came. I left the pie on their table and walked out into the rain. That night, I sat alone, staring at the empty chair across from me, Ethan's chair. The clock ticked louder than usual, and in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. A mother's heart doesn't break quietly. It fractures and echoes. The next few weeks turned into months. I tried calling, texting, even sending letters, but there was no response. Then, one day, I got an invitation, not from Ethan, but from Olivia. A formal card in a golden envelope, dinner at our home. Let's reconnect. My hands trembled as I read it. Maybe this was it. Maybe things were finally going to heal. But deep down, something told me this dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. I showed up wearing my best dress, the one Ethan had once said made me look like a queen. When I entered their dining room, I realized my intuition had been right. The table was set beautifully, but there was an invisible tension in the air. Olivia greeted me with her practiced smile. Ethan barely met my eyes. As we sat down, Olivia began talking about their new business venture, how successful it was, how independent they were now. Then she looked straight at me and said, "Ethan and I have been thinking. Maybe it's time you sold your house? You shouldn't live alone at your age." I blinked, unsure I'd heard correctly. "Excuse me?" She smiled again. "You could move into a retirement community. It'd be safer for you." I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to object. He didn't. He just stared at his plate. In that moment, something in me went cold. My own son was sitting beside his wife while she planned my exile, and he said nothing. That night, as I drove home, the rain poured harder than before. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the betrayal burn through my chest. I had given him everything, my time, my youth, my dreams. And now they were trying to take the only thing I had left, my home. I parked outside, sat in silence, and whispered to myself, if they want to take everything from me, they'll soon learn who they're dealing with. That was the night my grief turned into resolve. The night a mother died, and something far stronger was born. After that dinner, sleep became a stranger to me. Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Olivia's voice echo in my head, "Maybe it's time you sold your house." Those words crawled under my skin, twisting and whispering that everything I had built for decades was slipping away. I wanted to believe Ethan would come to his senses, that this was all some misunderstanding, but days turned into weeks, and not a single message came. Then one morning, while sipping my coffee by the window, I saw a car I didn't recognize parked outside my house. Two men in suits got out, holding papers in their hands. I stepped out onto the porch, and one of them asked, "Mrs. Lewis?" I nodded, heart racing. He handed me an envelope. "Notice of property evaluation," he said flatly before walking away. I tore it open right there, and my hands started trembling. It was from a real estate company, the same company Olivia's father owned. My name was on it, but it stated that my house was being considered for sale under joint recommendation. Joint recommendation. That could only mean one thing, Ethan. I sank onto the steps, the paper slipping from my fingers, and for the first time in years, I cried, not soft tears, but deep, painful sobs that came from the part of me that had always believed love was enough. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed awake nursing Ethan through his fevers, all the school trips I worked double shifts to pay for, all the dreams I'd pushed aside so he could chase his own. And now my son was signing papers to sell the only thing that was truly mine. But the crying stopped eventually. The tears dried, and something else replaced them, clarity. They thought I was weak, because I was quiet. They thought they could corner me because I loved too much. But they had forgotten something. I wasn't just a mother. I was a survivor. And I had survived worse than this. Over the next few days, I began to gather pieces of the puzzle. I visited the city records office, pretending to be confused about some misfiled property documents. The clerk, a kind young man, showed me that Ethan's signature had indeed appeared on preliminary sale documents. The buyer, a shell company under Olivia's family trust. That was when the full picture came together. Olivia didn't just want Ethan. She wanted everything that came with him, including what little I had. She wasn't marrying into love. She was marrying into ownership. That night, I sat in front of the fireplace, holding an old photo of Ethan as a child, covered in mud, grinning from ear to ear after his first soccer game. I whispered to the picture, "You don't even see it, do you? You're being used." My mind raced with possibilities. Should I confront him? Should I expose her? But deep down, I knew confrontation wouldn't work. Olivia was clever. She'd twist my words, make me sound paranoid, emotional, unstable. I needed proof, undeniable proof that she was manipulating him. And that's when an idea began to form, a dangerous, calculated idea. The next morning, I called Ethan and pretended to be calm. "Sweetheart, I've been thinking," I said softly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I should start planning ahead. Why don't you both come over for dinner next weekend?" He hesitated. "Dinner?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Just us. No tension, no arguments." He agreed after a long pause. I spent the week preparing, not just food, but something far more important. I installed a small voice recorder under the dining table and another in the living room clock. It wasn't illegal. It was my home, and I needed the truth. When Saturday came, I cooked everything Ethan loved: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and that same apple pie he used to beg for. When they arrived, I greeted them with a warm smile, hiding the storm inside me. We ate, laughed a little, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like old times. But as soon as dessert was done, Olivia leaned back and said, "So, Margaret, have you given more thought to the house?" I smiled, pretending innocence. "I have, actually. But tell me, Olivia, why are you so interested in it?" Her eyes flickered for just a second. "I'm not. I just think it's better for you." I tilted my head. "Better for me or better for you?" Ethan frowned. "Mom, stop it." Olivia placed a gentle hand on his arm. "No, it's fine. I understand. Change can be scary." Her tone was sweet, but her words were poison. I nodded slowly, pretending to agree. "You're right. Change can be scary, especially when you don't see it coming." She gave a little laugh, clearly thinking she had won. I let her believe that. After they left, I replayed the recordings. I didn't get much from the dining table, but the one from the living room, that one broke me. As they were putting on their coats, Olivia whispered, "Once she agrees to sell, we can use the funds to expand the business. It'll all be under your name, Ethan. She think it's her choice." Ethan didn't respond. He just sighed and said, "I don't want to hurt her." Olivia's reply was cold. "Sometimes you have to hurt people for their own good." I sat there for hours, listening to that one line again and again. My son was silent, but his silence was agreement. That was the moment my heartbreak turned to purpose. I realized that I couldn't save Ethan by protecting him anymore. I had to let him fall, but make sure he knew exactly who pushed him. So I started planning. I met with an old friend from my bookkeeping days, someone who knew how to trace money quietly. I learned that Olivia had been using Ethan's name on multiple business accounts, funneling profits to her family's company. Ethan, naive as he was, had no idea he was a puppet signing whatever she placed in front of him. For weeks, I gathered evidence. Bank statements, emails, transaction logs, every piece of paper that showed what she was really doing. But I didn't just want to expose her to Ethan. I wanted to make sure she could never recover from what she'd done to us. I wasn't after revenge for myself anymore. I was after justice. Justice for every mother who had been replaced, dismissed, and forgotten. The night before my next move, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the woman looking back at me. There were lines on my face, gray in my hair, but there was also fire in my eyes, a fire I thought I'd lost long ago. I whispered to my reflection, "Tomorrow the game changes." And it did. The morning after I made my decision, the world outside looked strangely calm, almost mocking. The sun rose gently, the neighborhood children played down the street, and birds sang like nothing was wrong. But inside me, everything had changed. I wasn't the same woman who had stood helplessly in the rain that night after their cruel dinner. I was no longer the mother waiting for a phone call that would never come. I was something new, focused, quiet, and dangerous in ways I had never imagined. My first step was simple. I had to make them believe I had surrendered. If Olivia thought she'd won, she would lower her guard, and that's when I'd strike. So I called Ethan later that afternoon. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I've been thinking about what you and Olivia said. Maybe selling the house is the right thing to do." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Ethan's voice came, cautious but relieved. "Really, Mom? You mean that?" I forced a small laugh. "I do. You both were right. I shouldn't live alone forever." I could almost hear Olivia in the background, whispering something I couldn't make out. Ethan's tone softened. "That means a lot, Mom. Maybe this will be good for all of us." I smiled even though no one could see it. "Maybe it will," I said quietly before hanging up. As soon as I ended the call, I sat down at my desk and began to write a list, not a grocery list, but a plan. Every detail, every move, every lie I would tell to lead them exactly where I wanted them. Step 1, make them comfortable. Step 2, collect everything. Step 3, expose the truth in a way no one could ignore. I started by contacting the real estate company listed on that property notice. I pretended to be an old, forgetful woman who just wanted to understand the process. They explained that once Ethan and I both signed the transfer forms, the property would be under their management for sale. That was perfect. I asked them politely to send me digital copies so my lawyer could review them. When they arrived in my inbox, I didn't open them. Instead, I forwarded them straight to my friend Daniel, the same man who had helped me trace Olivia's accounts. He was an expert in financial forensics, But what people didn't know was that he also had a knack for uncovering digital trails, deleted emails, fake companies, and paperless fraud. "Daniel," I said when he called back, "I need you to dig deeper. I think they're trying to manipulate the sale." He was silent for a moment before replying, "Margaret, are you sure you want to go this far?" "They've taken everything from me," I said flatly. "I'm already this far?" Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel and I worked quietly behind the scenes. I acted cheerful whenever Ethan or Olivia called, pretending to be excited about the new chapter. I even let them take me to dinner once, smiling and nodding as Olivia spoke about how relieved she was that I was finally doing what was best for everyone. But behind my calm smile, I was memorizing every word, every look between them. Olivia's arrogance was her weakness. She thought she was untouchable. One evening, Daniel called me, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Margaret, you were right. I found something." My heart raced. "What is it?" "Olivia's company has been transferring money from Ethan's joint account to an offshore account under her cousin's name. And get this, some of those transfers are labeled as consulting fees from your property value estimation. She's already making money off your house before it's even sold." I went silent for a long moment. "Can you prove it?" He sighed. "Oh, I can prove it. But if you're going to take her down, you'll need more than just numbers. You'll need witnesses. Someone credible." And that's when I remembered Olivia's old assistant, Clara. She had worked for Olivia before the marriage and suddenly quit a few months later. Rumor had it they had a falling out. I found Clara's profile online, messaged her politely, and after a day, she agreed to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. When she arrived, I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "You wanted to talk about Olivia?" she asked carefully. I nodded. "Yes, I need to know what you know." "Please, Clara, it's important." She took a deep breath before speaking. She used to make me sign off documents in other people's names, invoices, contracts, you name it. She said it was just for convenience. But I started getting calls from companies asking about payments I didn't even know existed. That's when I quit. I couldn't be part of it. My pulse quickened. "Would you be willing to say that again? On record?" Clara hesitated, then nodded slowly. "If it helps someone else not get ruined by her, yes." That was the moment I knew I had everything I needed. Now, I just needed to choose the right stage for the truth to come out. And what better place than the event Olivia herself had planned, their company's 5th anniversary gala. It was to be held in a lavish hotel ballroom full of investors, clients, and media. Olivia had even bragged to me about it on the phone, saying, "You should come, Margaret. Maybe you'll see how successful your son has become." I smiled as I remembered those words. Oh yes, I would come. But what she didn't know was that I wouldn't be coming as the quiet, forgiving mother anymore. I'd be coming as the storm she never saw coming. Over the next few days, I worked with Daniel and Clara to prepare everything. I printed documents, created a timeline of Olivia's transactions, and even added audio clips from my hidden recordings. Every piece was carefully organized into a single presentation file labeled Truth. On the night of the gala, I wore a deep navy dress, the one Ethan had gifted me years ago for his college graduation. It felt symbolic, one last memory of who he used to be. When I entered the ballroom, people smiled politely, not knowing who I was. I spotted Olivia near the stage, glowing in a red gown, holding a glass of champagne. Ethan stood beside her, looking proud but tired, like a man who didn't realize his world was about to crumble. The speeches began, the lights dimmed, and Olivia took the microphone. She spoke about growth, success, and family values. The irony almost made me laugh. As she spoke, I slipped quietly to the media desk, where Daniel was waiting with a flash drive. He nodded once, and I knew it was time. The projector behind the stage flickered. Olivia turned, confused, as her own company logo disappeared from the screen, replaced by a folder labeled Internal Financial Report, Confidential. A murmur spread through the crowd. Ethan stepped forward, whispering, "What's going on?" Olivia's smile faltered. And then, one by one, screenshots appeared, transaction histories, emails signed with her digital signature, offshore transfers, and voice recordings. Her voice filled the speakers. "Once she agrees to sell, we can use the funds to expand the business." Gasps rippled through the audience. Olivia's face drained of color. She turned toward Ethan, her lips trembling. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered. But Ethan wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, standing quietly at the back of the room. His eyes widened with shock, maybe even shame. The room fell into chaos. Investors began murmuring, phones came out, cameras flashed. Olivia tried to take the microphone, but security stopped her. It was over. She had built her empire on deceit, and I had just torn it down, piece by piece. As the crowd began to disperse, Ethan walked slowly toward me. His voice cracked when he said, "Mom, what did you do?" I looked at him, tears filling my eyes. "What I had to, Ethan. What you should have done." He stood there silently, unable to speak. And for the first time in a long time, I turned and walked away, not as a victim, but as a woman who had taken back her power. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Olivia was many things, but she wasn't the type to surrender quietly. For a few days after the gala, I thought it was over. The videos went viral online. Olivia's company's stock crashed overnight, and her investors pulled out one by one. I saw her name in headlines: CEO exposed for fraud. Business Queen's empire collapses. I didn't smile when I read them. I didn't feel victory. I felt empty. Because even after everything, a part of me still wished Ethan would come home and say, "Mom, I'm sorry." But that call never came. Instead, the silence returned, heavier, colder than before. I spent my mornings in the garden, trimming dead roses that never bloomed again, and my evenings sitting by the window, wondering if justice always had to cost love. Then, one night, around midnight, I heard a car stop outside. My heart jumped, thinking maybe it was Ethan, but when I opened the door, there was no one, only a small envelope on the porch. No name, no return address. I brought it inside, unfolded the note, and felt my stomach twist as I read the words, "You think you've won, but you've just started a war." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was delicate, sharp, Olivia's. My fingers tightened around the paper until it tore. I should have known she wouldn't disappear quietly. That woman was like smoke, Even when you think you've cleared it, it finds another way to choke you. The next morning, Daniel called, his voice tense. Margaret, have you checked your bank accounts today? My chest tightened. No, why? Check them now. I opened my laptop, logged in, and felt the blood drain from my face. My main savings account, the one I'd built over decades, was frozen. A red warning flashed across the screen. Under investigation. She's filing charges against you, Daniel said. She's claiming you illegally accessed her company data. She's saying you stole confidential information. I gripped the edge of the table. But I didn't. Everything I showed was mine, recordings from my own home. I know, Daniel said. But she's twisting it. She has powerful connections. She's making it look like you hacked her systems. I sank into the chair, my pulse pounding. This was her revenge, not through violence, but through reputation. She wanted to destroy me the way I'd exposed her, publicly. For days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters camped outside my house. Some called me a hero. Others called me a manipulative old woman who ruined her son's marriage out of jealousy. Lies spread faster than truth, and soon I was no longer the brave mother who fought back. I was the villain in someone else's story. Ethan didn't call. He didn't defend me. That silence hurt more than the accusations. Daniel tried to reassure me, saying, "It'll pass. She can't prove any of it." But I knew Olivia. Proof wasn't her weapon, perception was. She didn't need to win in court. She just needed to make me look like a monster. And she was good at that. Then, one evening, just as I was pouring myself a cup of tea, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. Ethan stood there, pale, tired, eyes hollow. For a second, I didn't know what to say. "Ethan?" He didn't move. "Can I come in?" I nodded slowly and stepped aside. He sat down, his hands shaking. "Mom," he began, "Olivia told me everything. She said you've been planning this for months, that you worked with her ex-employee to sabotage her company, that you forged those documents." "Ethan," I cut in, voice trembling, "you know me better than that." He looked at me, truly looked, and for a moment I saw my little boy again. But then he said, "I don't know what to believe anymore." The words hit like a knife. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see. "She's lying to you," I said, voice cracking. "I did what I did because I had to protect you. She was using your name, your accounts." He stood up abruptly. "Stop it. You keep saying that, but all I see is that you ruined her." His voice broke. "You ruined my life." The room went silent. He stared at me for a long time before whispering, "I wish you'd just left us alone." And then he walked out. I stood there, frozen, unable to move. The front door slammed shut, and with it, the last piece of my heart. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the photo of him as a child, wondering how love could turn into something so cruel. But by dawn, my tears had dried again, because something else had happened, something strange. I received an anonymous email with one sentence, "Meet me at the old Riverside Cafe at 9 a.m. It's about Olivia." There was no name, but instinct told me it wasn't random. Against all logic, I went. The cafe was almost empty when I arrived. A man in a gray coat sat in the corner. He looked up when I entered and gestured for me to sit. "You don't know me," he said quietly, "but I used to work for Olivia's father. I know what she's capable of." My eyes narrowed. "Why are you telling me this?" He slid an envelope across the table. "Because you're not the first person she's destroyed. And if you don't stop her now, she ruined more lives." I opened the envelope and saw photos, Olivia meeting with a man I recognized as a lawyer for her father's company, handing him documents that looked eerily familiar. My property documents. My breath caught. "She's trying to claim your house as hers," the man said. "She forged your signature this time. She wants to make it look like you agreed to transfer ownership after the investigation." My hands trembled. "Why are you helping me?" He gave a bitter smile. "Because she ruined me too." Then he stood up and walked away, leaving me with the evidence that could finally end this war. I returned home shaking, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. Daniel confirmed the documents were fake. She'd scanned my real signature from an old form and digitally copied it. This time she wasn't just attacking my name, she was taking what little I had left. That night, I looked out the window at the moonlight spilling across my lawn and whispered to myself, "You want a war, Olivia? Then you'll get one." My next move wouldn't be loud or public. It would be quiet, precise, and final. I wasn't going to destroy her reputation. I was going to take away the one thing she valued most: control. I knew Olivia liked the theater of her power, the staged announcements, the champagne flutes, the triumphant smiles for cameras, so I decided to take away her audience first. If investors stopped believing in her, her empire would crumble faster than any legal case could topple it. But I couldn't do this with anger. I had to do it with patience, and with the cold calculations that come from a life of scraping by and learning the value of every small advantage. My first move was to call in favors I had kept hidden for decades. There were people who owed me from my younger years, neighbors I'd helped through crises, small business owners I'd supported without asking for recognition, and a retired accountant, Mrs. Patel, who had a reputation for being incorruptible. I explained nothing at first, only that I needed her to look at some papers and tell me if anything smelled wrong. When she came to my kitchen table and sifted through the documents Daniel had compiled, she did not speak for a long time. Then she looked up and said simply, "Margaret, this is not just messy bookkeeping. This is a house of cards built on deliberate lies." Her certainty steadied me. While Daniel and Mrs. Patel mapped the money trail, I began setting small traps of my own. I changed my electricity billing address to the local community center, arranged for an official-looking notice about a fictitious trust audit to be sent to Olivia's company inbox, and anonymously alerted a respected financial blogger who had a history of exposing corporate fraud. Each little move was a pebble rolling down a long hill. By the time they hit the bottom, they would become an avalanche. The first pebble landed in an unexpected place, a quiet investor named Mr. Hargreaves, who had been flirting with the idea of pulling out months ago. He called me one afternoon, voice shaky with gratitude. "Mrs. Lewis, I received something today. I can't say where from, but I looked into it, and it made me very uncomfortable." I sounded casual on the phone, but inside I was already piecing the next step. "Trust your instinct," I told him. "Sometimes a small whisper is louder than a choir." He did what any cautious man would do. He quietly sold a chunk of his shares. The ripple became visible. Another investor followed, and then one of Olivia's board members, fearing the loss of reputation, quietly distanced himself. Panic spread like a stain through the company's upper levels. Olivia reacted the way she always did, with venom masked as composure. She called me, her voice cold and measured. "Margaret, I don't know what games you're playing, but back off." I let her believe she was intimidating me. "I'm done playing games," I said softly. "I just want the truth to be known." She laughed, a sound that had once been charming but now seared me with contempt. "You think you can break me? I built this from nothing." I let the lie hang in the air. "Maybe you'll think again." As the stock value teetered, Olivia's publicist began arranging damage control. Press releases, staged interviews, denial after denial. I watched it all, but I didn't respond publicly. Instead, I focused on the private battle that would finish her. Daniel and I had traced a set of shell companies that received regular payments labeled as consulting and intellectual property transfers. One name kept appearing: a supplier company registered in a neighboring country with ties to Olivia's cousin. That cousin, it turned out, had a soft spot for pleasure boats and flashy real estate, the sort of man who liked cash rolling through his accounts with little scrutiny. Daniel found a loophole. Because the transfers crossed borders, they were subject to a small, often overlooked compliance check when a new investor asked for a detailed due diligence file. If I could feed that file to a credible auditor, and if that auditor found the offshore trail, the regulators would be forced to investigate. But I had to make sure that when the audit opened, it would be public and immediate. I called in an old friend from the city council, a woman named Rosa, who had a reputation for stubborn integrity. She owed me nothing, but she knew the damage regulatory scrutiny could do to an already shaky company. I told her everything: the forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the way Olivia had skirted legal boundaries, and she agreed to look into the compliance documentation under the guise of a municipal grant review related to a small charitable initiative Olivia's company had been touting for PR. That evening, while Olivia was attempting another media interview about her commitment to transparency, Rosa quietly requested the grant files. The timing was perfect. As the cameras rolled with Olivia rehearsing her lines about resilience, Rosa's team opened the first door. The audit request triggered a second tremor I had prepared for: the whistleblower package. Clara, terrified but resolute, had agreed to file a sworn statement detailing how she had been asked to create fake invoices and how Olivia had once told her, in a moment of ruthless clarity, that appearances were all that mattered. Clara's statement arrived at the regulatory agency the same morning the auditors pulled up the offshore transfers. I remember watching the news feed, hands clenched around my tea, as anchor after anchor repeated phrases like regulatory probe and possible embezzlement. Olivia's composure began to crack on camera. She flailed through interviews, answered questions with practiced deflection, and accused me falsely of fabricating evidence. But the auditors were not interested in rhetoric. They were interested in ledgers, signatures, and cross-border wires. The trail was there, ugly and undeniable. The company's legal counsel filed emergency papers, but the auditors had the power to freeze accounts pending investigation. Within 48 hours, several accounts were immobilized, including the one that funneled money to Olivia's cousin. The man in the flashy real estate ads found himself unable to access funds. For someone who measured his worth in boats and trips, the freeze was a humiliation. The board convened a meeting that was supposed to be secret, but in a moment of irony, Olivia's own network leaked the contents to a financial magazine. That leak included internal emails where Olivia discussed manipulating investor sentiment through staged philanthropy, and a draft where she had written, in a tone of disgust, that older attachments were liabilities. The scandal grew teeth. As the company shrank under regulatory pressure and investor panic, Olivia's bravado turned inward. She lashed out at anyone she perceived as a threat. She sent me legal notices, threats of defamation suits, and hired lawyers who tried to paint me as a bitter, vengeful mother. I expected the aggression. I had planned for it. What surprised me was Ethan. He called, no longer angry but hollow, asking questions he should have asked months ago. "Mom, did you really forge anything?" he whispered on the line. I answered honestly, because lies would only build more distance. "No, Ethan. I used what I found in my home, in my own life. I didn't make anything up." His voice cracked. "I don't know what to think." "Think about what I taught you," I said. "About fairness. About responsibility." He fell silent. That night, he knocked on my door again, and this time when he entered, he sat, looked at me, and said, "I don't want to be controlled, Mom. I want to know the truth." He wanted to be free of Olivia's shadow. I wanted to believe him, but trust is rebuilt slowly, not in the heat of drama. We spoke for hours about choices, about how he had felt torn between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to the woman who had raised him. He told me about the subtle manipulations he had missed, how Olivia had repositioned his emails, how she'd smoothed over uncomfortable meetings, how she made him feel grateful for things he hadn't actually earned. His eyes filled with regret, and I found myself both furious and achingly tender. "You have to decide who you are, Ethan," I said softly. "Don't let someone else write your life because it benefits them." In the weeks that followed, the company shrank to a skeleton, executives resigned, and investigations broadened. Olivia hired a high-priced PR firm who attempted to salvage her image with sympathetic, human interest stories about her humble beginnings, her struggles as a woman in business, all of it flattened under the weight of the facts. The regulators issued a statement. They had found irregularities and would pursue criminal inquiries if necessary. That word, criminal, made the headlines. Investors called for her resignation. Creditors closed ranks. Olivia tried one last gambit, a press conference, where she would portray herself as the victim of a conspiracy led by me and a group of jealous competitors. I sat in the audience, watching her open her palms to the cameras, expecting applause. Instead, the room buzzed with an unsettling energy. Someone in the back stood up. It was Mr. Hargreaves. He looked uncomfortable, but he spoke with a kind of moral clarity that no PR script could replicate. I sold my shares, he said. Not because of a rumor, but because the books told a different story. I'm sorry for what you're facing, but the board needs integrity. A few others nodded, and the momentum shifted. Olivia's final performance collapsed under the weight of people who could read a ledger, not a line of a script. The board forced an emergency vote, and she was removed as CEO pending investigation. I felt no joy in that moment, only a quiet recognition that sometimes pulling the curtain reveals a stage so hollow it cannot hold an audience. But victory, if it could be called that, came at a cost. Ethan and I were not yet healed. He still needed time. I still needed to learn whether the space he took would be filled with truth or with resentment. And Olivia? She was dangerous still, her pride shattered but her will intact. She would not go quietly into oblivion. She would claw, litigate, and attempt to rewrite the narrative. I had set the final strike in motion, but I also knew the war could continue in other forms. For now, though, I allowed myself one quiet night of peace. I sat on my back steps, watched the stars, and thought about the long path that had led me here, from a mother protecting her child to a woman who had torn down an empire built on lies. I whispered into the dark, "We did what was right." It was a small consolation, but in that moment, it felt like enough. The morning after Olivia's downfall felt strangely quiet. For months, my world had been filled with movement, plans, calls, whispers, tension that lived in my veins like caffeine. But now there was silence. I woke up expecting another battle, another headline, another letter to answer, but the house was still. The ticking clock sounded louder than usual, and the sun poured through the curtains like it was trying to remind me that life still existed outside the storm. I made myself tea, my hands shaking slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the weight of finally being still. The news channels were still buzzing, their voices running over words like fraud, resignation, and investigation, but I turned the volume down. For the first time in a long while, I didn't need to listen. I had already lived every line of the story they were now discovering. But the silence didn't last long. Ethan came by that afternoon, looking more like the boy I once knew and less like the stranger Olivia had molded. He didn't knock this time. He just opened the door and stood there, hesitant but determined. I could see exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that comes from realizing the truth too late. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't know how to fix any of this." I motioned for him to sit, but he didn't. He just kept standing, like he didn't deserve comfort yet. "You don't have to fix everything," I said softly. "You just have to start by being honest." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I was so blind," he whispered. "She made me believe you were the problem. Every time you called, she'd twist your words, say you were trying to control me. I thought I was choosing love, but I was choosing a lie." My chest ached at his confession. Part of me wanted to tell him it was okay, that I forgave him instantly, but another part, the part that had endured months of isolation and disbelief, needed him to sit with that truth a little longer. "Love doesn't make you blind, Ethan," I said. "Control does. You wanted peace, and she offered it in exchange for obedience. That's not love. That's possession." He lowered his head. "She's gone," he said finally. She left the apartment this morning, packed a few things, and said she needed space. I didn't respond immediately. I had imagined this moment, the day Olivia would finally retreat, stripped of her control, but it didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy, inevitable, like watching a storm pass, knowing it had already left destruction behind. Sometimes, I said quietly, people run not because they're sorry, but because they can't face the mirror. Ethan looked at me then, his eyes red. Can I stay here? Just for a few days? I nodded. For as long as you need. The first night he stayed, he barely spoke. He sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at nothing, the weight of guilt pressing on his shoulders. I didn't push him. Healing doesn't come from lectures. It comes from presence. We shared silence like a truce. Over the next week, he began to talk more about the manipulation, the emotional traps, how Olivia had always made him feel like he owed her his loyalty because she had saved him from being too dependent on me. She said you made me weak, he admitted one evening, his voice trembling, that you used guilt to keep me close. And I believed her. I breathed deeply. She made you think love was a transaction, I said. But love isn't something you owe. It's something you share. The more he spoke, the more I saw the cracks closing. He began helping around the house, fixing the loose shelf he'd ignored years ago, making coffee in the mornings, small gestures that meant more than apologies. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when resentment surfaced, when I remembered the day he called me a liar, when he chose to believe Olivia's version of events over mine. But each day, the space between us softened. Meanwhile, the world outside our small home was feasting on Olivia's collapse. The company was in shambles. Regulators announced formal proceedings, investors demanded restitution, and former allies distanced themselves overnight. Olivia's name became a synonym for deception in the business world. But I didn't celebrate, because revenge, as satisfying as it might look from the outside, leaves behind quiet wreckage inside. There's always a cost. Sometimes it's your peace. Sometimes it's your ability to trust again. I realized that what I had really wanted wasn't to destroy her. It was to reclaim what she had stolen. My dignity, my son's love, the truth that had been twisted into a weapon. One evening, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, Olivia's. My pulse quickened as I opened it. The note was short. Asterisk. You may have won the battle, Margaret, but I will never forget this. You think you've taught me a lesson, but you've only reminded me that power belongs to those who can take it. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. There was no venom left in me for her, just pity. Because even after everything, she still didn't understand. Power isn't something you take. It's something you earn by standing on truth. I didn't reply. I burned the letter in the sink, watching the paper curl and vanish into ash. Ethan walked in as I was doing it. Was that from her? He asked quietly. I nodded. And that's where it ends. He hesitated, then said, I want to make things right. Not just with you, but with myself. I've been offered a chance to testify about what happened inside the company, the fake documents, the accounts, everything I saw. I'm scared, but I think it's the right thing. I smiled faintly. Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you act anyway. A few weeks later, Ethan stood before the committee. I didn't go. It was his turn to face his choices, his redemption. But when the news aired later, showing him speaking calmly, truthfully, admitting what he'd ignored, my heart swelled with something deeper than pride. It was peace. Olivia was officially banned from holding a corporate position pending investigation. Her name was removed from company buildings, her accounts frozen, her influence reduced to whispers of what once was. But that wasn't the victory I remembered. The real victory was seeing my son find his voice again, not the one molded by someone else, but the one that sounded like him. A few months later, as life settled into normalcy, Ethan came to me one evening with an envelope. Inside was a deed transfer, the house that had been in his name, now signed back to me. "It's yours, Mom," he said simply. "It always was." I felt tears rise, but I shook my head. "We'll share it," I said. "Because this isn't about ownership. It's about starting over." He smiled, the same boyish smile I had missed for years, and for the first time I saw no shadow behind it, just light. The months that followed were quieter, but silence after chaos is never truly peaceful. It hums with the echoes of everything that happened. The news about Olivia eventually drifted away from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and fresher faces. But for me, the story didn't end with her resignation. It ended slowly, in the quiet rhythm of rebuilding a life that had been torn apart. There were mornings when I'd wake before sunrise, sit by the window with my cup of tea, and still half expect my phone to buzz with another threat or headline. It took time to unlearn that kind of fear. I had spent so long surviving on alertness that calm felt unnatural at first. But then I'd hear the soft hum of the refrigerator, or the birds outside, or Ethan moving quietly in the kitchen, and I'd remember, peace takes practice. Ethan began to heal too, though his path was messy. He found a counselor, started attending sessions twice a week, trying to untangle the knots that Olivia had left in his mind. He would come home some evenings with red eyes, but a softer voice. We talked about everything, the manipulation, the emotional blackmail, the way love can sometimes disguise itself as dependence. One night, he said something that stayed with me. "Mom, I think I kept choosing her version of love because it made me feel needed. You never demanded anything from me." She did, and I mistook that for passion. I smiled gently. Real love doesn't demand. It gives without keeping score. Over time, he started volunteering at a local youth mentorship program. I watched him listen to young men who were lost in the same ways he once was, helping them see the traps of manipulation before they fell in. That, to me, was redemption, not an apology, but action. Meanwhile, I had my own journey. For years, I had defined myself as a mother first, then as a woman betrayed. But as the dust settled, I realized I wanted more than survival. I wanted meaning again. I began volunteering at a local shelter, teaching small business skills to women who had been financially controlled or manipulated by partners. I saw my own story reflected in their eyes, not the same details, but the same pain of having your worth decided by someone else. The first time one of the women told me, "You made me believe I could start over," I cried all the way home. because that's what I had been doing too, starting over. Occasionally, I would see Olivia's name pop up in an article. She had retreated from the public eye, but there were rumors of her trying to start over under a new identity. A part of me wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done. Another part knew she probably didn't. People like her rarely see themselves as villains. They see themselves as victims of other people's strength. I didn't hate her anymore. Hatred was heavy, and I'd carried enough. Instead, I learned to let it go, to understand that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's the freedom you give yourself. One rainy afternoon, I visited my husband's grave for the first time in years. I had avoided it, partly because it hurt too much, partly because I felt like I had failed him. As I stood there, umbrella trembling in the wind, I whispered, "It's over now. She can't hurt us anymore." The wind rustled through the trees, soft and mournful, almost like an answer. I told him everything about Olivia, about Heathen, about how close we came to losing ourselves. I told him how I finally stood up, how truth won, how love found its way back. When I left the cemetery, I felt lighter, as if the ghost that had haunted our family had finally been buried alongside the lies. Weeks turned into months, and life began to look normal again. But it wasn't the same kind of normal. It was a quieter, wiser version. Ethan started dating someone new, a kind, gentle woman named Lily who worked as a nurse. The first time he brought her home, he looked nervous, like he was afraid I'd judge her through the lens of his past. But the moment I saw the way she looked at him, with patience, not control, I knew he had learned. Over dinner, she laughed easily, not trying to impress, just being herself. After they left, I smiled to myself. Love, when it's real, doesn't compete. It complements. It grows, it listens, it forgives. One evening, a letter came addressed to Mrs. Margaret Lewis. It was from the Financial Commission. They wanted to inform me that the investigation into Olivia's company had officially concluded. The report confirmed what we had known all along: years of falsified records, offshore accounts, and investor deception. The letter also mentioned that my cooperation and Ethan's testimony had been instrumental in uncovering the truth. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box that held all the fragments of my life, old photos, Ethan's childhood drawings, and now this symbol of closure. As I slid it under the bed, I realized that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, softly but surely, reminding you that the truth has a longer life than any lie. That night, I sat on the porch under the stars. Ethan joined me, handing me a cup of tea just the way I liked it, 1 sugar, no milk. We sat in silence for a long while before he said, "Mom, I don't think I've ever said thank you. Not just for what you did for me, but for not giving up on me when I gave up on you." I looked at him, my heart full. "You're my son," I said. "A mother doesn't stop loving her child because he's lost. She waits until he finds his way home." He smiled, eyes glistening. "I'm home now." I nodded. "Yes, you are." The breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine, the same kind that had once grown outside the house we'd lost years ago. I closed my eyes and thought about how far we had come through betrayal, through heartbreak, through war and truth, and how somehow love had survived it all. That night, as I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I whispered a small prayer, not of vengeance, not of regret, but of gratitude. Because sometimes justice isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your peace. It's about knowing that even if the world breaks you, you can still rebuild, stronger, wiser, softer. And maybe, just maybe, it's about realizing that love, real love, is the only thing that survives when everything else falls apart.